George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
This is London, live and kicking on New Year's Day, 1st of January 2023. It's going to be a momentous year, but hey, aren't they all momentous years? And one thing is certain in 2023, God willing, is that the mother of all talk shows will continue to grow and grow in audience and influence and keep you up to date with our perspective on national and international events. We may not always get it right, but we will always get it truthful. You will never hear us say anything in which we don't believe. Neither will you ever hear us say anything that has been dictated to us by any other person or interests. This is the unvarnished truth as we see it, as we have delivered now for 199 previous episodes, because that's right, folks, this is episode 200. Of course, we've had far, far more than that. This show began in January of 2006, but in this iteration, this most glorious and vast of iterations, this is the 200th episode, and we want your feedback. I want your New Year resolutions. I'll tell you what mine is: to get MOATS America on the air in 2023 on a Friday night, late for European viewers, but at a decent hour for Americans. We hope to take the fight into the heartland of the American empire, because one thing is clear: there are millions of Americans who think just like me and just like you, or at the very least are open to the alternative point of view. The last year was one in which conspiracy theories increasingly became conspiracy facts, and so we must now approach matters with a more solid and different floor to that which we did before, starting with 9/11. Anyway, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night, as Betty Davis once said. It's the New Year edition of the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows, the only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, 2023 will be dominated by the NATO war against Russia, as indeed 2022 was. From February 25 until this day, there is no bigger story anywhere in the world, and its shadow has loomed over all political, economic, social, and cultural developments of the previous 12 months, and that is not going to change. How do I know? Because the head of NATO, a tailor from Norway called Stoltenberg, or something like that, has just actually announced pronunciamento just before I came on the air that the Ukraine war is going to last a long time. That kind of renders otiose my poll for the evening, which was, will the Ukraine war be over this year? My vote would have been no in any case, although thousands of people have been voting, and it is a close run thing, at least until the tailor from Norway spoke. If NATO say it's going to be a long war, that means it is, because it is NATO that has made the war in the first place. Not in the last 10 months, that's absurd. Only a fool now clings to that canard. But in the last 8 years, perhaps in the last 14 years, NATO has been determined to use Ukraine as a cat's paw against Russia. And that cat's paw's claws turned toxic, and it was inevitable, ineluctable, that Russia would intervene. As NATO may well have wanted them to do, that is a distinct possibility. What they cannot have wanted was for the inventories of the NATO powers to be empty on New Year's Day, for that is what they are. It is abundantly clear now that Russia could march all the way to Berlin, all the way to Paris, and NATO could do nothing about it except fire nuclear weapons, which would be repaid in kind, and then the end of the world would be upon us. But short of nuclear catastrophe, the NATO armies have nothing left to fire. One by one, the American inventory, the German inventory, the British inventory has steadily emptied. But the Russian inventory has not. The Russian military-industrial complex has already established in the last 10 months that it is infinitely superior to the Western one. And of course, armies don't just march on their stomach. They don't march at all unless they have the logistics and the weapons to fire. So in that regard, it's 1-0 to Russia in this NATO-Russia conflict. In fact, it's several more goals to the good for Russia than that, which I shall now adumbrate. But before leaving the issue of logistics, Russia is now on a full war footing, whatever they say. They don't announce that there's going to be total mobilization, but it's my belief that in 2023 there will be increasingly total mobilization. The oligarchs that were still at large and still at their anti-patriotic games are now actually beginning to be cracked down upon, where they're not falling from tall windows in high buildings. The oligarchs are being cracked down upon because this has become a great patriotic war for Russia. The Russian people are fully behind their government, not 100%, of course. Even our government in 1940 and 41 had a fifth column of 10 or 20%. Unfortunately for us, most of ours were in the palace, in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and in the upper reaches of the British establishment. But Russia has about 20% of its population in a fifth column also, although helpfully for Russia, many of those have now fled abroad. But the motherland, as was the note struck by Putin in his address yesterday for the new year, is what the Russians are now fighting for. And as the world ought to know, when the Russians are fighting for their motherland, they cannot be defeated. At least not by a ragtag and bobtail coalition of the weird and the wonderful. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, let alone the Netherlands, but the idea that the Netherlands is going to fight Russia is, I promise you, entirely fanciful. It is entirely fanciful that the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Czechs or the Slovaks or the Romanians or the Bulgarians or many others that I could mention are going to fight Russia is entirely fanciful. This NATO war, even if you put a Norwegian tailor at the top of it, is an American and British war against Russia. And Russia's been here before. 101 years ago, the British and American armed forces, in their hundreds of thousands, invaded Russia to try and regime change the new Bolshevik government there. The Soviet Union was proclaimed exactly 100 years ago this year. It's no longer the Soviet Union. Putin is no Lenin. his government are no Bolsheviks. And there are good and bad sides to all of that. But as the Red Army proved in 1943, 44, and 45, it is unbeatable when fighting for its motherland, which is now what it is doing. And therefore, the war can only end one way. It will not end, in my view, this year, but it can only end in a complete Russian victory. And every day that goes by means that the terms of that victory get harder to bear for the coup regime in Kiev and its international patrons. Let me sketch as I've done before, but my ideas are now clearer than before. Russia will take all of the east of the Ukraine, all of the south of the Ukraine, and will link up with Transnistria, liberating it from its limbo, from its purgatory of neither being one thing nor the other, being Russian but not Moldovan, being not Moldovan and not Romanian either. Transnistria and the south of Ukraine will be one entity, along with all of the east of Ukraine, which will all become part of Russia, leaving a rump and landlocked Western Ukrainian state increasingly prey as Medvedev, the new sage of the Russian government, who knew I never fancied him at all before, but he's one of the few who are publicly laying out what is something approaching a vision for not just Russia, but his anticipation of what's going to happen to the rest of us. The Western Ukrainian rump landlocked state will be increasingly prey, says Medvedev, to Hungarian and Polish depredations, both of whom have their eyes on ancient lands of theirs that only thanks to the aforementioned Bolsheviks were ever in Ukraine in the first place. Only thanks to the Red Army were only ever in Ukraine in the first place. So that Western Ukrainian rump, like Kosovo, will be a permanent cross to bear for Western taxpayers. And because those Western taxpayers are going to be forced to continue the self-harm, the harikiri, the economic suicide of their own economies in the name of fighting Russia, the taxpayer that's shouldering that cross will be increasingly unable to do so. So that Western Ukrainian rump will become an armed camp, just like Kosovo. It will be activated from time to time, just like Kosovo is being activated right now against Serbia and against its big brother Russia, and the stage is set for a long war. It will not, perhaps, be an all-singing, all-dancing war, an all-encompassing war of attrition, at least not once the South and the whole of the East has been liberated from the government in Kiev. But it will be a long war because NATO will move into that rump state as they have moved into Kosovo, and it will be transformed into an armed camp. Millions of Ukrainians will be on the move in other directions, just like the millions of others that have already done so, and like the huge numbers of Kosovans who are to be found in any part of Western Europe. I'll spare their blushes by adumbrating where it is that they can usually be found. Now, Medvedev's vision was that this will place increasing stress and strain on the European Union. And I suspect that he may be right about that. We already have, perhaps already have always had, a two-speed Europe. Franco-German and in the past Anglo core of the EU with a lot of satellite labor exporting countries around it, net beneficiaries of a central treasury based in the German banking houses, in the great Chancery of Berlin. But that chancery is not what it was, and neither is its treasury. And so the appetite of the now Franco-German core of the European Union to continue carrying everyone else is considerably diminished and may disappear altogether, depending on what happens in Germany. I have spent a lot of time talking to you about developments in Germany, and I intend to do so even more in this coming year, because for me, what happens in Germany will determine what happens in all of Europe. In Britain, we are in the SH1T. We have had more prime ministers, chancellors of the exchequer, home secretaries and foreign secretaries than even I, a political junkie, could possibly remember without an autocue delivering it extempore to you down this camera. Our political class is shot through. You could measure it by the knighthood that was given this very day to somebody called Chris Bryant. You can search him on the internet. You'll find him in his underpants on some gay dating agency. You'll find him in the list of apologia given for offences committed against parliamentary protocol, defaming people and having to apologise for it. You'll find him in lots of murky corners, Sir Chris Bryant. But never mind. Arise, Sir Chris. You're now a knight of the realm, which does nothing but tell us how cheap is now the realm. How cheap is the realm of the United Kingdom? Well, you can measure that by the fact that we are now apparently forced to call somebody called Camilla our queen. Although she isn't the queen, although she is in fact the queen consort, whatever that means, probably means that she consorted with the man that is now the king behind his wife's back for many years and played a considerable role in driving the actual Queen of Hearts, Lady Diana, completely mad. It was Camilla what done it. She drove her completely mad, and you could say, therefore, contributed to her unfortunate demise in a tunnel in Paris. This adulteress was herself married and the mother of several children during all of those years that she carried out her sordid affair with the man who is now the king. He wanted to be her Tampax. Other brands are available, but you ought to know that it is a sanitary precaution that women of a certain age insert into themselves when menstruating. He was caught on tape describing how he wanted to be Camilla's Tampax. That's how cheap is the realm. But these are merely the fripperies of the realm. The real realm is in Whitehall and in Westminster, and that realm has never looked more threadbare. I'm going to predict to you that the British government will collapse in the course of 2023, and that we will have a general election, and that a block of wood called Sir Keir Starmer, already tried and tested for roadworthiness by NATO, by the EU, by the United States and the ruling elite, and found to be entirely trustworthy. He is their pick. They cannot accept this Johnny come lately, Rashid Sunak, as their prime minister, because Rashid has no political strength, neither in his own party in parliament, and let me tell you, his current rating in the public opinion polls in the United Kingdom. Rashid Sunak today commands the support, loyalty, and voting intention of just 19% of the British people. I warned the Tories when they got rid of Boris Johnson. He was the only man that could have saved their bacon. Thank God they got rid of him. But don't think that Keith Starmer is going to make any difference to you. Our economy is in a nosedive, the bottom of which cannot yet be viewed. The British economy is almost in free fall, and it isn't going to improve. Our workers are on the cobbles, demanding that they must minimize the wage cut that their employers are currently offering them. That can only grow, and the anger can only grow when the billions that could have been spent on our own workforce, on our own nurses, on our own railway workers, on our own labour, are handed over to a cross-dressing pornography actor called Volodymyr Zelensky. The rest of the public has not yet caught up with this diminutive, dwarfish figure. They do not yet know that he has made off with their prize. But in the course of 2023, they're going to find out good and proper. And they'll probably find out first here on the mother of all talk shows. I told you to stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds
by H.G. Wells.
Read by George Galloway. Available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the Flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, you can listen to The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, narrated by me, on my Patreon page, patreon.com/George Galloway. A big hello to all of my supporters on Patreon. You've been with me through the darkest days, and I will never forget you. And I will constantly replenish the content that is coming your way. I'm thinking 7 pillars of wisdom once we've finished with the War of the Worlds. Our podcast, by the way, is doing stunningly well. Number 1 in Qatar this day, New Year's Day. Number 5 in Pakistan, where there's a very great deal of competition, but more on that later. I said earlier, and I said it advisedly, in 2022, a lot of the things we thought of as conspiracy theories turned out to be conspiracy facts. Now, I myself have been unkind to some people as conspiracy theorists, and I'm still unkind to some that I regard as conspiracy theorists. But as Groucho Marx said, when the facts change, so do my opinions. And my opinions on several things in 2022 began to change markedly. One thing that has not yet changed is my attitude to 9/11. But I'm more ready now Now that I know for sure that the CIA murdered President John F. Kennedy, now that I know for sure that both the CIA and the FBI were involved in the murder of Malcolm X, now that I strongly suspect that we were sold a pup by Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies when they told us of the efficacy of the vaccine that we were paying hundreds of billions of pounds for, now that I can see that wearing a mask on your face was utterly pointless, as is proved every day in China, where everybody wears a mask and everybody is triple vaccinated, but is going down in huge numbers with COVID. Now that I know that many of the things that we have been told were untrue, I'm ready to listen to my next guest with unusual attention, because he is from a lawyers committee. In fact, he's the litigation director of the lawyers committee for 9/11 Truth. And the peg for this discussion is that they are in court in the United States very, very soon. He's Mick Harrison, and I'm grateful that he has joined us on New Year's Day. Happy New Year, Mick. Is it going to be a good new year for the litigation? Tell us what you think is going to happen.
Well, Happy New Year, George. And I think it's going to be a constructive, positive, progress-oriented 2023. The key at the moment may be the decision we're waiting for from the U.S. Supreme Court. We have a status conference with I don't have a status conference, but the judges are meeting on January 6th to decide whether they're going to take our case. And our case is about some fundamental constitutional rights that have come up, some rights issues that have come up in the 9/11 context. One of which is, do citizens have a right to report a federal crime to a federal grand jury? And that's a right that's been historically recognized even before we had a constitution, came over from England, and it was adopted in the U.S. Constitution as it existed pre-Constitution. And I don't know if you know, George, the background for this Supreme Court case. Shall I give you a bit on that?
Yes, kindly, for the broader audience, yes. And tell us what federal crime it is that you allege.
Well, the crime that we allege, and in my view, as a public interest lawyer of 30 years, in my view that we have proven, is a bombing crime. It's a crime that involves use of explosives at the World Trade Center on 9/11, which explains the complete collapse of 3 World Trade Center buildings on 9/11, which pretty much everyone has seen on television by now, if only in a replay. And if you watch those collapses, they look a lot like what's called a controlled demolition in industry, where you use explosives to bring buildings down. A lot of folks don't know yet, some of your listeners may not know, George, that the third skyscraper that fell on 9/11 was Building 7. It was not hit by an airplane. The other 2 towers, everyone knows, was hit by an airplane. Some people dispute that. I don't, and my organization does not. But what we dispute is the reason the buildings fell down. And if you look at our petition to the grand jury, which we gave to the U.S. Attorney in New York, it goes through eyewitness testimony of first responders, trained professionals, firefighters, police, and so forth, these folks reported sights and sounds of explosions on 9/11. It goes through the finding from laboratory analysis of the World Trade Center dust, which shows explosives, high-tech explosives in the World Trade Center dust. A number of other anomalies that have been documented, even documented by government studies, that show there had to be extreme temperatures at the Trade Center on 9/11, which in fact were measured on 9/11. When I say extreme, George, I mean very high temperatures, much higher than jet fuel can create, much higher than building contents create when they burn. So, but even though we felt like that evidence was dispositive on the issue of use of explosives, when we submitted our petition, We were just asking the U.S. attorney to deliver it, meaning to hand it to the grand jurors so they could make up their own mind. It's sort of like you said at the beginning. We should keep an open mind. Sometimes conspiracies turn out to be real, sometimes not. It depends on the evidence. And my organization is a follow the evidence, follow the law organization. We don't have any time to be dealing with, unsupported allegations, speculation. We're just looking at hard evidence, scientific evidence, eyewitness testimony, the things lawyers normally look at. And so we just asked the U.S. attorney to give the evidence, which is a 50-some page detailed petition, 50-some exhibits with the scientific evidence and the eyewitness testimony, just hand it to the grand jury. Let the grand jury decide what it thinks about this evidence. And you might be surprised to learn what the U.S. attorney did with that, particularly given that there's a federal statute in our country that says that U.S. attorneys have a mandatory, emphasize the word mandatory, duty to deliver citizen reports of federal crimes to a federal grand jury, particularly a special grand jury, which is the case here. So what the U.S. attorney did was they didn't deliver our petition to the grand jury. They may have told the grand jurors that the lawyers committee reported a crime. They might have named the crime as bombing at the World Trade Center, but they did not give our petition with all the evidence to the grand jurors. So we sued the U.S. attorney in federal court to enforce that mandatory duty. And all we were asking wasn't for anyone to agree with our conclusions. We just wanted the law enforced that says the U.S. attorney must hand over the citizen report of a crime to the grand jury. Surprisingly, the district court decided that not only my organization, but another organization, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, a nonprofit as well as mine, and family members who lost family members on 9/11, and first responders, some of whom were our co-plaintiffs, that none of us had legal standing to ask the court to decide the question. And so the question didn't get decided. So even though neither court, the district court or the Court of Appeals, disputed the mandatory duty in the statute, they basically said we don't have a right to enforce it because none of us have legal standing. And of course, our question was, well, if family members of victims don't have standing and if first responders don't have standing, who the heck has standing in this country? And in our view, nobody would. So the Second Circuit, the second highest court in this country, decided our case on appeal, and they unfortunately decided to agree with the district court that we didn't have standing to enforce the duty, and they went beyond that to do some fairly disturbing things. What the Court of Appeals said basically is it's up to the U.S. attorney solely to decide what the grand jury gets to see. Now, for those who studied the U.S. Constitution, you know that the grand jury is a constitutional entity independent of the other three branches. It's its own fixture of the federal government. The Constitution creates it that way. So it's not beholden to the Department of Justice or the executive branch. It's not beholden to Congress or even the courts. The grand jury has a lot of power and independence, at least as it was created. If you look at the Second Circuit decision, if it isn't reversed by the Supreme Court, as we're asking, we're going to be in some difficult times here because the independence of the grand jury may have effectively been eliminated by this decision. And what that means is, and I expect you know this, George, that the grand jury was intended initially to protect citizens from political prosecutions by a rogue government or rogue government officials. So they just wouldn't go after their political adversaries and put them in jail on some false trumped up charge. Grand juries are supposed to protect against that. You can't get an indictment without a grand jury signing off on it. That's an important protection. But if the grand jury only gets to see the evidence that the U.S. attorney wants the grand jury to see, the grand jury isn't independent at all. It's just going to be a handmaiden to the Department of Justice.
Well, look, Mick, you've certainly persuaded me a very somber resume of what would appear on the face of it to be a ludicrous contention that you don't have standing if, as you say, a family member bereaved by 9/11 has no legal standing to advance this petition? Who does? The answer would have to be nobody does. Only the government does, which, as you say, renders the grand jury process null and void. If the Supreme Court means anything, if the word supreme means anything, you might get some relief there, no?
We hope to. And that's the way the system is supposed to work. The Supreme Court is supposed to be the ultimate defender of the Constitution. And there's an even more fundamental problem with the Second Circuit decision on the standing issue in this case. And that is, it wasn't just that the Second Circuit decided we didn't have standing to enforce the statutory duty on the U.S. attorney to report the crimes to the grand jury. Disturbingly, the Second Circuit also decided that our right to submit a petition to any branch of the federal government under the First Amendment, the right to petition for redress, didn't give us standing to complain that the Department of Justice interfered with our right to petition. And it did so because it blocked the delivery of our petition to the government entity for which it was intended, the grand jury. And
that's what's called a catch-22, isn't it?
Pretty close. There's no way out the way the Second Circuit drafted it. You know, citizens are never going to get their evidence in front of a grand jury under the Second Circuit's view unless the U.S. attorney wants the grand jury to see it, which means it supports whatever political position the U.S. attorney is taking at the moment, which is what we're supposed to be avoiding by grand juries. So in this country, for decades, the Supreme Court has been very clear: when a constitutional right is violated, the victim of the violation, whether it's First Amendment or Fifth Amendment or any right, has the ability to go into federal court and ask the court for a remedy and to order the violation corrected. That might seem like, obvious and necessary law to enforce the constitutional rights, and it has been for decades in this country until now. And the Second Circuit decided that even though we were exercising a First Amendment right, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Even though we asserted we were exercising a First Amendment right, the Second Circuit essentially said there is no right under the First Amendment to petition a grand jury, even though it's an entity of the federal government. So, yeah.
You could be forgiven, Mick, for becoming disheartened on this. And yet, as I said in my introduction, I'm going to infer that you are, roughly speaking, my age, not that much younger, in which case, if I'm right, you have seen a situation where the official story about Jack Kennedy's murder has fallen apart to such an extent that it isn't even news anymore when someone like Tucker Carlson, with great eloquence and power, accuses to camera the American government themselves of having killed their own president. So it's the monolith that you're describing as the U.S. attorney will not be a monolith forever, perhaps.
Well, we're not giving up on the fight to enforce the Constitution and change, how shall I say, the politics that have created this problem. The problem you articulate, and Tucker is a little late to the game on the JFK assassination, which has been, a subject of citizen concerns for decades in this country. A lot of evidence to support that position. I personally, unfortunately, agree that the evidence points to a conspiracy. Congress actually found there was a conspiracy in that assassination. A lot of folks forget that. My organization is focused on 9/11 issues, so we haven't taken a position on JFK. But here's the problem. It's not just, 9/11, and it's not just the anthrax attacks which followed 9/11, which a lot of folks have forgotten about, which also brought more fuel to the fire for the war machine to go to the endless war on terror. there have been a number of instances of violence used against the government and government officials in the United States. Assassinations come to mind, but they're not the only instances. The anthrax attacks were another example. 2 weeks after 9/11, anthrax, a bioweapon, was sent through the mail, and the targets of those mailings included 2 U.S. senators, and those 2 U.S. senators happened to be the ones holding up the rushed passage of the Patriot Act. And they almost were assassinated. Fortunately, they were not by those anthrax letters. So, and, there are some other examples. My organization isn't addressing them yet, so I won't talk about them in the moment. But let me just say there's a pattern here of unremedied, unprosecuted, violent crimes against the government and government officials in the United States. 9/11 is part of that pattern. JFK is part of that pattern. There are folks out there that if they don't get their way, they think still that might makes right, and they can use violence to get their way, including in the United States.
Perhaps particularly in the United States, but that's for another day. My last point, Mick, and I'm grateful for your time. The JFK murder was, for me personally, as a person of Irish Catholic background who loved JFK, was of very great significance. But 9/11 is of far greater significance. The killing of Kennedy did not lead to war throughout the world. 9/11 did lead to war throughout the world, which continues to this day. It led to the war on terror, which led to the rise of ISIS, the strengthening of Al-Qaeda, the alphabet soup of Islamist extremism. It led to terrorism exploding all over the world. It led to the reduction in liberty in your own country and in mine. It could not be exaggerated, the impact of 9/11. And therefore, if it turned out to be that 9/11 is not the story we think it is, it's incalculable what the impact of that would be, isn't it, Mick?
Well, it is. You stated it very articulately, George, and I agree with everything you just said. The problem is that there's a lot of evidence out there. Some of it's in our petition, a lot of it, but we're not the only ones putting this evidence out there. A lot of scientists, engineers, architects, other lawyers, other advocates have for years. And that evidence creates, at a minimum, a legitimate fact question about what happened on 9/11 that's never been investigated by any government entity. And even if you don't agree with our petition and our position that the evidence scientifically is dispositive, and we think it is, it's one of those Sherlock Holmes things where, when you eliminated the impossible, whatever remains must be the truth. Well, the scientific evidence eliminates everything else. So explosives, incendiaries had to be used. So the question is so huge, as you stated correctly, that even if there's only a doubt that we might be right, the grand jury needs to see this evidence and decide for themselves. Congress needs to do its own investigation, which is never fully done. And, the worst case here is pretty severe, the worst possible case. And it deserves an investigation that is equal to the severity of the problem that you have articulated.
Mick, Ice Fury, one of our viewers, asks, are there any high-ranking, standing or retired military officers, New York firefighters, or NYPD who would join this petition?
I think the answer to that is yes, in regard to high-level military, although to my knowledge, none have done so yet. We do have some firefighters, New York firefighters, who joined our petition already. One of them was a fire
and
commissioner.
Police officers also?
Let me think about that. Possibly.
Sorry,
we have.
You were telling me about the fire commissioner.
And the fire commissioner, Chris Joya, is actually one of the co-plaintiffs in the case that's now in front of the Supreme Court. So he was there responding after the attacks at Ground Zero, as were his colleagues. He lost a lot of friends, as many folks did, in those attacks. And he has had the courage to speak out on the issue and has joined our litigation. I'm very honored to consider Chris my friend and colleague at the moment. There are a lot of firefighters who are concerned. A lot of your listeners may not know that the fire department in New York took testimony from over 100 firefighters, I forget the exact number, after 9/11 to preserve their testimony. And the testimony was preserved, but it wasn't released. And then the New York Times sued under the Freedom of Information Act and acquired all those first responder testimonies, and they're now available if you know how to find them on the New York Times website. And a lot of those folks say, you know, I saw what looked like an explosion. I heard sounds that looked like an explosion. Some of them even said, it looks like what you see on television in a controlled demolition. Some of the firefighters said that as their impression in the moment as they watched the collapse of the buildings. That's, in a normal case that wasn't politicized, that would be pretty significant evidence of a bombing crime.
Well, look, Mick, thanks. When you get the result, we'll return to it. When do you expect to hear the Supreme Court decision?
Well, we're hoping in January. The Supreme Court, of course, follows their own schedule, not mine. And they're meeting January 6th to discuss the case, and I'm sure a number of other cases. I expect after they do the discussion, they won't take them long to make the decision. But it's possible the Supreme Court may invite the government to respond to our petition, which has not happened yet. The government declined initially to respond. So if the government decides to respond, that may take an additional few months.
January 6th, an auspicious date last year, and this. Thank you very much indeed, Mick Harrison of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth. I don't know about you, I actually find that a very fascinating treatise on a subject that might very well become the biggest subject on the planet. Stay tuned, I'll be right back.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, I can already tell how controversial Mick Harrison's interview was. If you want to respond to it, disagree, by all means, with Mick, with me, with anything that you've heard on the show so far. The number in the UK and Ireland is 08 081 965522. That's 08 081 965522. You call us and we'll call you back, and your call to us will cost you nothing at all. Ditto in the US and Canada, where it is toll-free, as they say. And there the number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You call us, we'll call you back, and the whole thing will cost you nothing at all. If you're in the rest of the world, which I assure you does exist, it is +44 203 966 2625. Now, you heard me say at the beginning that my New Year resolution is to get MOATS America on the air on Friday nights, probably around, I don't know, midnight UK time, so 7 p.m. Eastern. Although these are movable coordinates, the most important thing is to provide a dedicated MOATS in America. We'll do all the back shop. These will be the same phone numbers. We'll do everything that is, as it were, behind the screen, but I won't be the presenter. The presenters will be from a panel of some of the best Americans that we have had on MOATS over the last 200 episodes, and you know who they are. They'll fix the guests, they'll choose the guests, and they'll ask the questions. But it will still be recognizably MOATS. It'll be MOATS America. If you want to help us get that on the air, here's what you have to do. You can donate now if you're watching on YouTube, and if you are, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and like this show. You can go to the Super Chat mechanism and make a donation. It's as simple as that. And that fighting fund will help us get MOATS America onto the air. If you're watching on Rumble or Getter or Twitter or Facebook, then please go to our website. That's moats.tv. And our website has a donate button there, which you can use, and even make it a recurring donation. I'm only asking for $1, €1, £1. I think I'm worth it. How about you? Now, thanks to our regular donors, of course, our dear friend in Norway, Otto Calvo, gives, as he always does, 50 Norwegian crowns. Thank you, Otto, as always. Teresa Mason gives $5. My dear friend Teresa Kelly gives $10, as she so regularly does. And my dear friend Ian Paddock, gosh, Ian, £44.99. Always happy to support Gigi and the team, says Ian. Always an education. Happy New Year. Ian, I can't thank you enough for that. Also, thanks to those that are coming in. Justin Daniels gives €2. Did you know Alex Jones predicted 9/11 2 months before? I did not, Justin. Sean Corrigan gives £10. Send Marcus Rashford in. Marcus is on fire. I was at Old Trafford the other night, seeing him up close and personal. My goodness, he's looking sharp. Chicka Boom Boom 2 gives $2, looking good with a beard, well groomed. Very nice of you to say so, Chica. And Karen Dixon Santos gives $2. Thank you indeed for that. Goose Creek, my old friend in the Netherlands, gives €22. Goose is a potential sponsor of the midweek show. We're hoping to hear from him. But thanks very much for that interim donation, Goose. Pat Daly gives €50. Pat, wow. And Linny Jenkins gives £5 sterling. Linny, thank you. Rudolph Grasspointer gives €5. Every year I wish a happy new year, but it's always getting more politically disappointing. But never lose your faith, Rudolph. Hugh gives £50. £50 from Hugh. I can hardly believe it. Hugh, or Shue, as we would call you in Scotland. Thanks very much indeed for that very handsome donation. On line 1 is Joe in New Jersey. on Donald Trump. Go ahead, Joe.
Hey, Happy New Year. Hey.
Happy New Year to you, brother.
All right, same to you, man. Best wishes to you and your friends and your family and all of your audience. Your audience has got to be a group of good people, of audience of goodwill, and best wishes to all those, man, the people who stand and for truth and want to hear truth and the voice of the people that's suppressed by all the other media networks. Thanks, George. And I'd like to say, George, I think you're an asset to humanity. I don't say that much, George, but what you do every week and your passion, and I mean, you just don't give up. And I disagree with you a lot on Trump. I could argue hard with you on Trump, but I know your spirit of intent and your will is good, and it's for the benefit of all humanity, not for the benefit of a certain population, not for the benefit of a certain race or certain people. Your will and your intent is for the benefit of all. And I'll say it one more time. I don't say it often, but you are an asset to humanity, George. And thank you. Thanks.
God bless you, Joe, for that. I'm very touched by that. Go ahead.
It's truth, man. I mean, it's truth. And we can't forget Julian Assange, and, best wishes to Julian today. I don't know what he's, feeling today or what he's witnessing, but I'm sure it's not good. And another victim of Donald Trump, another victim. Hey, George, I want to comment on 9/11. I have some very strong opinions. I believe that this was a conspiracy of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and our CIA. Israel benefited the most from 9/11. There's no doubt. And that was what I consider the coup government of the United States of America. The government that no longer represented the will of the American people, no longer represented the voice or the needs or the wants or the future of the American people. Since then, they became loyalists to Zionism and Zionist ideology, and they wiped their feet on the backs of the American people. They have zero respect for those who they were elected to represent. And that's gone. And this whole 911 thing. If we go back to Operation Northwoods of the CIA, which all you Kennedy folks seem to have missed, but the Operation Northwoods was put together by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it was actually terrorist attacks that they wanted to commit in the United States of America from Cuba. I mean, the whole write-up is on Wikipedia. I suggest that rather than hearing it from me, you folks learn for yourselves and read it. But that was the preamble to 911. And when John F. Kennedy heard about the Operation Northwoods, where they were going to blame Russians and blame Cubans for terrorist attacks on New York City, terrorist attacks at Miami, John F. Kennedy said, no way. There is no way. And he was the one that shot it down. And let's not forget that one of the greatest gifts to Israel also was the death of John F. Kennedy, because Johnson was a stout Zionist, and everything Israel ever wanted, they got under the Johnson administration. So we can't forget them. And the Operation Northwoods, in my opinion, was the layout and the plan for the new coup government. And yep.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Joe. That was Joe. Just because of the hour, I have to stop you. But it was a most powerful tour de horizon. I disagree with you on some of the points that you made, but you made them so cogently and with such passion. I didn't interrupt you. And now it is the hour, and therefore I need to take a quick break. After which, it's my good friend Faran from the front line in the good old US of A. And I'm taking your calls 08081965522 in the UK and Ireland, and in the US and Canada +1 844 944 3344. I'll be back in about 60 seconds time, just enough time to have a mouthful of coffee. Stay tuned. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. My good friend Faran Fronczak is a journalist and radio and television host extraordinaire. To call her a journalist and broadcaster is sincerely to undersell her attributes. She's one of our most popular American guests, and undoubtedly, if we can afford her, will be one of the presenters of MOATS America once we get it up and running. And I'm glad to say, although she was meant to be with us last week, that she's here this week in all her glory. Faran, Happy New Year to you. Thanks very much. You're looking fantastic, I must say. Just tour the horizon as we open the new year in the United States. How does the political lie of the land look to you?
You know, George, I don't know what's going on here. Your sound just went out. I cannot hear anything that you're saying. And I'm looking at it on YouTube here as well, and the audio is out. So I don't know what's going on. But Happy New Year. Great to see you.
Well, that's a great pity. That's a great pity because I was effusively complimentary about you and you didn't hear any of it.
Again, I can't hear anything. I'm going to try to leave and come back. Studio can't hear him. I try to let you know in the chat.
All right, we'll drop that for now. Faran will get back to you. So you can call me, as I say. You can vote on the poll, which is looking like a record poll and rather closer than you might imagine in its result. While I'm waiting to get back to Faran, let me tell you about a couple of very important things. On the 7th of February, which is a Tuesday night, I will be in Sunderland with the mother of all talk shows, Roadshow. Gayatri will be there with her camera and her microphone, interviewing the audience, and will show some of these interviews during the subsequent editions of MOATS. It's me on stage, taking any and all questions from you and talking about the show and the issues that are current. And in the northeast of England, in a post-industrial place like Sunderland, they are bound to focus on the parlous state of the British economy, and indeed, for that matter, of British society. And the other big event in February is February 25. Keep that date in your mind. February 25, no to NATO, no to war in central London. And the speakers so far are me, Chris Williamson, the former Labour MP, Max Blumenthal of the Grey Zone, Anya Parampil, the great American groundbreaking journalist, and many, many others. Andy Hudd, the British trade union leader. We're waiting for confirmation from Russell Brand, Rusty Rockets, and from Arthur Scargill, who's not at all rusty and is still 75 years young, the leader of the British mine workers during the historic battle in 1984 and 85, and many other wonderful speakers. Craig Murray, the Honourable Craig Murray, that many of you know former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. We've got a great lineup, and we need you there in central London. The venue will be announced within the next week or so, but it's in central London on Saturday, February 25. Express an interest now. Follow them on Twitter and on Facebook, I think. Faran is back, and I hope able to hear me. Faran, I'll spare the audience and your blushes by not repeating all the wonderful compliments I paid you in the
I'll have to go back and watch.
introduction to this interview. You can go back and hear them on YouTube. I was asking you, just survey the scene as 2023 opens in the United States. How does the political lie of the land look to you?
You know, George, and again, so sorry for the audio issues. It was on my end, actually. We're just learning. But so 2023, starting out with a bang, on Tuesday, you have the new Congress that's going to be swearing in, and they, on Tuesday, are also going to be voting on who the House Speaker will be. For those that don't know, across the pond here, the Republicans took back the House with a 222-seat majority. Kevin McCarthy, right now the House Minority Leader at the moment, you need about 218 votes to secure that House speakership position. There are 5 Republicans, namely from the Freedom Caucus, saying, nope, we're not voting for you. So he has literally less than 48 hours to try to sway those votes back to his favor, because if he doesn't get the majority, then it goes to the Democrats, and then essentially the Democrats could, bring in a new speaker and take the helm. So as far as the political landscape, pretty rocky ground, George. Starting 2023 off really well.
So tell me, explain to non-Americans, what is the Freedom Caucus? What's their problem with McCarthy, and who would they prefer in his place?
So, it's interesting, but members of the Freedom Caucus, big notable names you would know would be like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Rep. Matt Gaetz down in Florida. You have Jim Jordan. Senator Lindsey Graham used to somewhat be a part of it when Trump was in town. He's not really anymore. He's actually back with the moderate Republicans that always side with the Democrats that do as well. The basically not a party, just the elite party again. So the swamp is back alive and well, obviously. But the Freedom Caucus, they are very much, came on the rise of Donald Trump. And we're very much about, getting things done, being very pro-conservative on a lot of different issues, balancing the budget, not a lot of spending. And as far as who they want, they have floated Jim Jordan, who is a Republican from Ohio. He's on the House Judiciary Committee. If you've ever had the time to watch a congressional House Judiciary hearing, Jim Jordan was the guy, especially during the Hunter Biden laptop stories and stuff, where he would be just drilling people that were testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. And another notable one was Trey Gowdy, who recently had left. But it was those two on those committees that would really hammer down those that were testifying. So they've floated Jim Jordan. They've also floated the House Minority Whip, Steve Scalise, which, if you don't know, there was the congressional baseball game a few years back, and he actually was one of the congressmen that was shot and survived. So they've talked about him. The problem with Kevin McCarthy that they have, George, is that they think that Kevin McCarthy, since it's the Freedom Caucus and they kind of were pro-Trump, they don't like the fact that it seemed like he sold out Trump or that he didn't defend him enough. And they also don't like the fact that they just don't think he's a strong enough candidate. They don't think that he's going to be able to tell the Democrats, no, there's a new sheriff in town, this is how it's going to be. Kevin McCarthy kind of taking that role of, well, we need to compromise in order to get things done. When I say far right, I don't mean like alt-right. I'm saying like the far fringes of the right, because the Democrats and Republicans right now, they're fractured. You have the far left Democrats, the far right Republicans. Those two outside groups do not like compromise anymore. Whereas the folks in the middle, or that elite ruling class, they're all about compromise and literally getting nothing done. So this Freedom Caucus wants stuff done immediately. They already have a number of investigations that they're pulling forward the day of on January 3rd. One of it being the Hunter Biden laptop investigation. Where did the COVID virus come from? Biden's dealings with Ukraine. They have about 6 different investigations that they're opening up day one, January 3rd. So this Freedom Caucus wants to get stuff done.
I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait for those investigations.
Yeah.
Presumably a deal will be done. They'll be talking turkey and carving out pork out of the barrel and so on as we speak. Because it's inconceivable that a pro-Trump rump is going to allow the Democrats to take back the speakership of the House. So either McCarthy has to step down or these 5 will be bought off, don't you think?
Well, and that's one of the things that Kevin McCarthy is actually offering is before, in order to have a Speaker of the House step down, it had to be a member of the leadership that would ultimately bring it to the floor for a vote. Kevin McCarthy, to get those 5 votes, has been saying, hey, I'll switch the rules, because that rule was put in place by Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat. Kevin McCarthy saying, hey, you know what? If you vote for me, I'll make it so that it doesn't have to be a leadership position. Anybody can bring it to a vote to have the speaker removed. So that's kind of one of the concessions that he's been trying to make. Whether those 5 Freedom Caucus members are going to bite, TBD. We'll find out Tuesday.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned Trump. We're only viewing him from afar and only intermittently because he's actually been surprisingly low profile over here. So here's my guess. It's probably wildly wrong that Trump's light has dimmed a little. Is that yours?
You know, it's interesting. Like I was mentioning before, the Republican Party, as well as the Democratic Party, they've fractured to either pro-Biden or he's too old, get him out when it comes to the Democrats and bring in some fresh blood, which is why Nancy Pelosi stepped down as House Speaker. You also have on the Republican side, those that are still very much pro-Trump and call everything that's been going on with him, for example, the latest January 6th House committee hearings and their final report that was released last week, calling it just this, since he started, this witch hunt. And then you also have the Republicans that are saying, you know what, he's just too controversial. The country is starting to kind of find some level of normality. Let's bring in somebody new. A lot of people talking like a Ron DeSantis, talking about a Tim Scott of South Carolina, a number of different people, including one of them who ran for governor, Darren Bailey for Illinois. There's talks of him floating his name out there to see, what he could do now that he has moved since to Chicago to study Chicago corruption, my hometown. It's very corrupt, makes DC look like it's just child's play. But it's one of those things where you have a lot of other people that are talking about putting their hats in the ring, but I don't think we're going to start seeing a lot of people jumping in the race until this summer, and they're just going to be poll watching every single day until we hit, May or June.
Of course, there's always the possibility that Trump could run as a third-party candidate. I saw that referred to the other day, but he would only do that if he felt that it was going to be too much of a struggle to get the Republican nomination, wouldn't he? I suppose the Hunter Biden investigation is going to do for Joe Biden. I myself think it's inconceivable that Biden will run again in 2024. I just don't think his bowels will stand up for it.
No, and George, it's so funny. I've been covering extensively all of the different Twitter file drops that we've had from the amazing journalist Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss. And It's so interesting because, being here in Washington, D.C., I have the closet conservatives, as I call them here. You don't come out and say you're a Trump supporter or you're a conservative in this town. And then you have the Democrats, that are mainly throughout the city. And so many people saying this Twitter Files is a nothing burger. It doesn't mean anything. And I'm sitting here like, wait a minute. This was a pretty big platform that silenced a lot of people. Yes, okay, it's a private company, but it's also a town hall of sorts, and the game has changed when it comes to social media. And you have the Hunter Biden laptop story. Democrats are like, that's nothing. It's nothing crazy big. That's not going to sway my vote, or that's not going to sway voters. And it's like, you know what? We have the most amount of independent voters we've ever had in the United States. There's a reason. They're not telling you how they feel, and that's why the polls are always wrong, because people don't really want to come out and talk to you and tell you how they really feel. But from what I'm seeing with many, many people, when I'm like, hey, it's safe to talk to me, how do you really feel? They're like, I'm sick of the corruption. I'm sick of it. So a lot of the powerful elite need to remove head from sphincter and realize the American people are getting real sick of it.
Now, tell me this. We're both active Twitter users. And full disclosure, I have a legal case against them, which in February will reach its next stage. Far from being a nothing burger, it seems to me that these Twitter files expose corruption on the grandest of scales. It turns out that Elon Musk bought the company from the FBI and the CIA. It was nothing more than an organ of the U.S. security state.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things. It was a quote that I heard, because I can't even take credit for it. I can't remember who said it. It might have been Matt Taibbi, where he said, Elon Musk didn't purchase a social media company. He purchased a crime scene. And when you look at how the FBI, I mean, you were talking before with the guest about the 9/11 truthers and different conspiracies like JFK. And, we all know, like we saw with Gulf of Tonkin, a number of different conspiracies that have been proven that we're not all crazy. Here you see, everyone's been saying the FBI's in with social media. The FBI's in there. The FBI's in there. Mark Zuckerberg flippantly says on the Joe Rogan podcast, oh yeah, they came by and we suppressed the story. Like, it's just no big deal. And then with these Twitter drops too, you do see that these people did a revolving door. They went to the FBI, and then then they went to social media, and then went back to the FBI, and then went back to social media. It's almost eerily similar as the military industrial complex, where they go work for the private, defense contractors, then go back to the Pentagon, then go to the defense contractors. It's this gross revolving door that these folks do it. And here at the highest levels, where these folks are supposed to be about justice, about truth, we saw none of it. And it was completely politicized, which the conspiracy of the FBI is politicized. Ron Paul saying for decades now, abolish the FBI, and he was called crazy. I think he deserves an apology at this point.
Yeah, I mean, they called it a public square, but it was actually a prison exercise yard. It was watched over by the watchtowers and the men with guns up on those towers. And if you were dangerously close to breaking out of the prevailing orthodoxy, you would be metaphorically shot down. And the numbers of ex-spooks of various kinds that were literally employed by these companies, we only know, thanks to Musk and Taibbi and Vice, we only know what we know about Twitter. We know next to nothing about Facebook and YouTube and all the other social media platforms. But it turns out it is the biggest job creation agency in history for former CIA, FBI, security officials of various kinds. They go through that revolving door and sit in an office policing what the rest of us can say or read other people saying.
And you know what the scariest part of it all, George, to me was, in talking about these Twitter files, was that you only had like maybe 2 or 3 people in these email exchanges that Matt Taibbi lays out, or like Michael Spellberger too is another reporter on it as well. 1 or 2 people being like, "Do you think we're overstepping our bounds? Like, do you think this is not okay?" You even had progressive leader Ro Khanna emailing Vijaya Gotti, who was the head of legal, being like, "You suppressed the Hunter Biden story," which he would be the one that would want it to be suppressed on party lines. But he's like, "You are taking this way too far, and you're suppressing the oldest news organization here in the United States, one of the oldest, founded by Alexander Hamilton, a founding father, and you're suppressing this story." And it's just, no, I'm sorry, we don't see the First Amendment the same way. And here it's like these people just blindly followed what the FBI wanted, what the CIA wanted, and rarely did you see any little pushback. And you see, like, how was it that a company like this not only gets this big, but also gets this brainwashed on the inside just by these, 80 FBI employees that were working there? It's just, it makes you think, like, are we doomed with humanity that there was only a few, like, people saying, or is this not okay? And that to me was the scariest part of it all. And props to those who have come forward, and one of them even saying, "I was the one that pushed back, I was the one that questioned," because it's probably not a safe position to be in right now. I mean, we heard what happened with JFK. Very scary position to be any kind of whistleblower.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Your car might just suddenly start accelerating and the brakes don't work. Faran Fronczak, as always, thanks very much for joining us. Glad you've got your voice back, and we'll see you
Thanks,
again
George.
soon. Thanks for joining us. Now, Faran, who's Faran Balanced on Twitter, has just donated $20 on the Super Chat. Thank you very much, my dear. Let me take a quick break, and then I'll take your calls.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland, even the European, which he then owned, all over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
If you knew Maxwell like I knew Maxwell, you'd know just how hollow and vainglorious that last statement he made really was. You can get the Maxwell tapes from my Patreon page, patreon.com/George Galloway. Here's the numbers again. In the UK and Ireland, it's 08 081 965522. In the US and Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. And in the rest of the world, it's 44 203 966 2625. Some YouTube comments. Christopher Dobby on the 9/11 story says the towers fell down because they were compromised by being hit by a jet plane. The first to fall was the second building, as it was hit further down the structure. Yeah, of course, I mean, I'm not disputing that, Mr. Dobby. I'm wondering why Building 7 fell, though. Baron Saturday says, Tam Pax Romana. And Viking Eriksson says, I am Norwegian and very ashamed and angry with Stoltenberg. Indeed so. And Uzi 1mm says, those of us who warned the left about Starmer before and even in the months after the leadership election were dismissed as tinfoil hat cranks. No longer, I can say. Damola Adeyeye says, not that I'm a royalist, but it's a tall order to predict the demise of the royal family within 12 months. Even King Charles can't manage that. I'm not sure I predicted that, Damola, although I'd welcome it. And Coffee says, Nostradamus claimed Charles's reign would be short-lived as he'll abdicate in favour of a male who didn't expect to be king. My money's on Edward, not, as most claim, his half-wit son H. Cruel, cruel. Tom is in Glasgow on the Ukraine. Welcome, Tom. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Brother George. How you doing? Salam alaikum. How you keep?
Walaikum salam. Nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
Long time no speak, yeah. Well, just listen to your stuff on the 9/11. I remember talking, I listened to Dennis Goldberg on the 12th of September, the day after it, and he said undoubtedly this was a state-sponsored terrorist attack because, and if you look at America, they've got a system, the system for flying planes is called intercept, friend or foe, where planes are, you know, they can be, they've been known to go off course, and they've got a system to track them down. They've got numerous Air Force bases all over the eastern seaboard where fighter jets can do 6-7 times the speed of sound and could have easily intercepted any of these jets, but didn't do it. And indeed, Donald Rumsfeld was running so-called training courses. And then if you look, that there was documented evidence that weeks before it, that there was a company in doing maintenance work there, how first responders, who many of them have died sadly after it, stated that they heard pop, 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 pop. 3 buildings came down, 2 planes hit the buildings. If you look at the Pentagon, and the 10th of September, Donald Rumsfeld said 2 trillion has disappeared from this building. If you look at the damage that happened in Lockerbie over 10-mile radius, if you see the damage at the Pentagon, where did the wings go to? If you see the stupid evidence they gave of it was a missile that came in because it couldn't possibly be a jet. There's so many questions that have to be asked. I mean, on your old previous thing you were on, George, I was on from way back then, over 20 years, and if they can kill their own president in broad daylight and get away with it, these people have the chutzpah of the devil. And I've been saying for over 20 years, and George, I'm happy that you've changed your tune, because I remember back in the day saying about it. I changed my tune about the independence. I'm now against independence. It's good to hear that you're on the side. I mean, if you look at, and all player, and fair play to you, because the lies and the deceit that is given out about Ukraine is just despicable. How the Nazi brigade in there, once again funded by America. You can look at George W. Bush's grandfather, Herbert Bush, bankrolled the Nazis to 30 billion away back in the day. America has been funding, and Britain as well, to try and take out the Russian state, the Soviet Union, for over 100 years. And the lies I've been told constantly, how anyone can believe that the lies that come out from Britain and America, all power to your elbow, George, for putting people like Scott Ritter on. And me, I say, I've got an American grandfather. If you ever want anyone to stand in for you for your American show, I'd put my hand up, brother. I love you to bits. It's been a long time since I spoke to you. I've missed speaking to you. And God bless what you've done in this show. And keep it up, brother. God bless the Celtic.
God bless you. I wasn't aware of who you were when I invited you to speak, but I'm jolly glad that we've remade our acquaintance. Tom in Glasgow was a regular caller throughout the near 20 years now that this Mother of All Talk Shows has been running. Very, very nice to hear from you again. Let's stay in Scotland, but in the posher part, to Edinburgh, where Timothy wants to talk about Ukraine. Timothy, welcome. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, George. I've actually moved from Edinburgh. I recently came back down to Northampton, so unfortunately, Tom, Glasgow, Edinburgh can't have that inversion.
Okay.
But
All
no.
right.
So what I was going to say was, like, just so that people have kind of a concept of how the Russians view just normal, ordinary Russians view the conflict. It's that obviously they're pro-Russian, they're pro-special military operation. But I was talking to my granny yesterday, and it's just, obviously, it's a strain on the family. But the thing is, what people understand, okay, it's like about the length of it. It's like people understand that it kind of has to drag on because of all the things that are happening outside of it. So geopolitically, like decoupling and the like from the US and the de-dollarization and everything, that these things take time because these are all structures that have to be reformed, and that's a bureaucratic process and so on. Yeah. However, fundamentally, the hurt is that it's like, but we're dying, we're getting killed. And what she was saying was that yesterday there were 83 or so soldiers being returned from Ukrainian hands, and then she's like, "Oh yeah, on TV they're saying, oh yeah, woohoo, they're back, and there's this whole fanfare and so on." But then they're crying. They're without legs. They're tortured by the more barbarous elements of the Ukrainian armed forces. And again, I won't compromise myself too much on but again, it's like knowing people who are fighting. It's just, it's obviously scary. And then it's the frustration is that it's like, why is it that it's us that are having to suffer? And obviously it's like there's economic fallout in here, but it's like, but the lives are being lost. Well, whose are they? Where it's like, obviously it's the Ukrainians, but that's one thing. But it's like, again, it's like we're having to be sacrificed again. And then obviously here, people absolutely not understand. Like when I was in Edinburgh, I had a Russian flag outside my window. It was luckily not subject to too much abuse. I only had to wash it a couple of times from the eggs thrown at it. But it's just, I don't know. It's about the lies being peddled by the state in terms of the Ukraine, and it's just.
Well,
I think
but
it's
a diminishing. Thanks, Timothy. It's a diminishing return, though. If you measure in January 23 the support for the Ukrainian narrative compared to any time from February 22, it's vanishingly small now. The state still does it. So little Sadiq Khan, who's currently in Mecca, I understand, nonetheless ensured that there were Ukrainian flags on the big wheel at the London New Year celebrations. But there's no Ukrainian flags in Mecca, or in Saudi Arabia, or anywhere in the Arab world, or anywhere in Africa, or anywhere in Asia, or anywhere in mainland Europe, other than the official flags of government and local government, sometimes the police force. But the population long ago fell out of love with the Ukrainian cause, which is not to say that people are not weeping inside for the suffering of the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian people have suffered most of all in this grim, grisly picture The Russians also have suffered. And thirdly, the European public has suffered economically on a grand scale, and it isn't even really started yet. You ain't seen nothing yet to what you'll see in 23 on the economic front. The one group of people who have not suffered at all are the oligarchs that run the United States of America. They have made a fortune out of everybody else's misery. Timothy, thanks for the opportunity to make that point. Thousands of you have voted. Most of you seem to think the war will be over in 23. Thanks again for all your super chats. Summer of 1970 gives $10 US, says thanks for the 9/11 segment, George. Thank you. A Slave of Allah gives £1.79. Bismillah. And D.R. Deeb gives £1.79. GG, the best. Thank you. Lawrence Lee gives 20 Canadian dollars. Ronwell Nagales gives $2 US and wishes us all a happy new year. And the Vinyl Dreamscape gives $199. We need your voice, George. Farzana Razvi gives $199. Cyril O'Reilly gives $20 US. We may be related. Cyril O'Reilly is my late grandfather's name. Happy New Year, says Cyril. Peter Teichmuller gives 20 Canadian dollars, says Happy New Year from Canada. I've been spreading the word to my friends about your show. All the best to you and yours in this new year. And Linda Petit gives £10 sterling. Thank you, Linda. Michael Jenka gives $10 US. 2022, 2023 in the bush. Hola Ebofin gives £2. God bless George. Happy New Year. Thank you. And Gerard White, wow, gives £50 sterling. Thank you, Gerard. I greatly appreciate that. And Justin Daniels gives €5. Just before 9/11, says Justin, some Israeli businessmen put money on those airline stock dropping and made billions. Watch loose change and the dancing Israelis. The trouble with these things, Justin, is that they turn out not to be true. The story that no Jews went to work in the Twin Towers on 9/11 was a monstrous anti-Semitic lie. There were huge numbers of Jews killed in the Twin Towers on 9/11. It is important that we stick to the facts. When the facts change, so must our opinions. And we'll never know if the facts have changed if we refuse to allow a proper debate and study of all those things that purport to be facts. And that's why I'm backing the lawyer's petition on January 6th. Rico 611 gives £20.23. Thank you, Rico. Happy New Year. You continue to be one of life's net contributors and voice for the people. Thank you for keeping us abreast of the lies, corruption and hypocrisy of our government, media and large conglomerates. Very beautifully expressed. Thank you. Golden Silence gives $2 US. Wish you all an abundance of health and success. Thank you for that. On line one, we're still in Scotland. It's Robert in Glasgow on the Kennedys. Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, hello, George. Yes, I was just telling that I'm not against conspiracies. I believe 9/11 was a conspiracy. For instance, I believe that the planes were flown to ground level. They were controlled and flown to ground level. But the Kennedy assassination, now, I'm slightly older than you, George. I turned 11 in October 1963, a month before the Kennedy got shot. Now, where I was, I can remember to this day the teacher telling the classroom, do you know President Kennedy? And I nodded, because I'd heard of President Kennedy, but I didn't know anything about him. Now, I was in a place with two other schools, pupils with two other schools, my age group, in a place called Galloway House, down in Galloway. Now, as I was growing up, I was the same as everybody else. I used to think it was a conspiracy, especially after I saw the Sabruger film. I think it was made public 5 or 10 years after Kennedy got assassinated. And I saw the film.
10 years, yeah.
Yeah. I saw the film that was made in the 1990s. But what changed my mind was I saw a documentary that was made. I think it was made in 2003, 2004. 40 years after Kennedy got assassinated. Now, I think it said that the American government made this documentary, or they financed this documentary because they were that concerned about all the conspiracy theories going about. Now, in this documentary was the youngest member of the Warren Commission. There was a woman that worked in Jack Ruby's club. There was a ballistic expert, a forensic expert, and an expert in organised crime. There was also Lee Harvey Oswald's brother, amongst others. Now, this documentary started off, this man had made a computerised, three-dimensional, one of these three-dimensional cartoon things that they made in the computer. I can't quite remember what the name it is, but it shows all around the area, all around the plaza area, and it shows round the car, above the car, it shows where Kennedy was sitting in relation to Connolly. His seat was placed slightly to the left of him. I think that was so that when Connolly turned round, he could see the president better, rather than sitting right behind him. Now, it shows you the first bullet missed. The second bullet hit Kennedy's upper back, went through his neck, went through the back of Connolly, came out just below his nipple, and hit his hand. The third and fatal bullet hit Kennedy in the back of the head and blew out the front of his head. They gave the angles of the shots. They went back, followed a straight line, and the two shots went straight back to that compository window where Lee Harvey Oswald was said to have shot him. That's where the bullets came from. Then he showed the Sabruger film.
I don't agree with that, Robert. I don't agree with that. But finish your point. But the points you are making now about the ballistics are absolutely rejected by me and by many others. But go on.
Okay, right. Then he showed the Sabruger film. Now, the first bullet missed, and he says, you see Connolly. He turns to his right because he thought he'd heard something. The second bullet that went through the two men. You see Kennedy slouching slightly to his left, and he's put his hand up. And at the same time, Connolly's lapel in his jacket is disturbed, and there's grimace in his face. And what he said was, both men reacted at the same time, and what he said was, the single bullet theory isn't a theory, it's a fact. Now, he also gave the time between each shot, and he said that was enough time to make each shot. And
he must have been some marksman, this Lee Harvey Oswald. Yet there's no evidence at all that he was any kind of marksman in the slightest. I've got to press on, Robert, not because it's not interesting what you're saying, it is, but because there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Happy New Year, dear Norma.
Hello, George. It's not too happy at the moment. I've got family illness on my relative side. It's very serious. But it's no good me dwelling on it. I just wanted to tell you about, Alice Mann died on Christmas Day. Can you hear me?
God rest her soul. She was a good friend of mine. Yes, she was a good friend of mine.
I knew she was, George, and I can remember at the Iraq War debate, she was the only woman MP in Parliament that actually spoke against it. And I had great admiration for her. She was in her 80s, and she was a very special person, you know?
She was 85. She was a former nurse. She was an activist in the Nurses Union, as was then NUPE, the National Union of Public Employees. She came into Parliament as a working class champion, as the salt of the earth, and she proved to be one of the most assiduous parliamentarians that I sat with over the nearly 3 decades I sat in the House. She was a gem, an absolute jewel of a woman. She, of course, as you say, opposed the Iraq War, the Afghan War, but perhaps with more difficulty. She was one of a hardy band of us that opposed the Yugoslav War in 1999. And she did it with such courage and conviction. When there were only a few of us who withstood the propaganda, at least by the time we got to Iraq in 2003, there were a lot of us, Norma. But in the Yugoslav war, there was only Mr. Ben, our leader, me, Alice, and Jeremy Corbyn, and a few others that opposed that war. Even Ken Livingstone supported the Yugoslav war. Michael Foot supported it. Mark Seddon supported it. Tribune supported it. We were a hardy bunch, and Alice was one of the hardiest of us. Over to you, Norma.
No, the funny thing is, Joe, I totally agree. I was quite upset when I read about that, although she's lived a long life. And the funny thing is, if you ever saw me, she looked a bit like me. Every time I see her face, I think, gosh, she doesn't have to look like me.
Well, let's hope we'll all get together again on the other side, Norma, because if there's a heaven, Alice Mann will definitely be in it. And let's hope you and I get past the pearly gates. Thanks very much for the call. Sorry to hear about the illness in your family. May God strengthen all of you. Gerard in London says, 9/11, Building 7, all records of Enron destroyed. Well, Gerard, that's the first time I've heard of that. I'm not rejecting it out of hand because I don't know, but I've never heard that. Now, we're inundated with calls about 9/11. We'll try to get as many as possible on the air before 9 o'clock. Meanwhile, the super chats are flooding in. Red Cloud gives £4.99. Thank you. Golden Silence, $5. GG, never mind that Russia is dismantling the Ukrainian infrastructure. Ukraine turned off the lights so they can enjoy the stars at night. And Toy Chung gives Hong Kong dollars 158. That sounds like a lot. I hope it is. Thank you. Femi Okeni gives £5. Happy New Year to all the MOATS family. Thank you, Femi. GDNPB gives $10, hoping all of the MOATS people have a great 2023. Let's go to Melvin in New York, where it all happened on 9/11.
Hi,
Melvin,
George.
welcome back to the show. Happy New Year, brother.
Yes, Happy New Year. You hear me well?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So I'm going to start this off by telling you what firefighters used to be taught, okay, before 9/11. We were taught that fire burns up. That's why we were used to put triages, the medical areas in large buildings, in the buildings, okay? So in 9/11, when everything came down, you had a lot of people that got hurt for that reason. Another, excuse the phrase, cluster, I'm going to leave out the swear part, but people can guess, was that we had way too many chiefs and not enough Indians, if you understand the phrase. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you had that going on through the whole thing, nonstop. And the last thing I'm going to mention is to remember that every firefighter is taught from day one that anything that goes wrong is because we made a mistake, regardless of the situation. When someone gets hurt or someone dies, we're taught it is our fault because we didn't follow the proper procedure or we had the lack of knowledge. In this case, it was mostly a lack of knowledge. That was just something I wanted to integrate on this. That's
Powerfully
all I have
put,
to
Melvin.
say.
Thank you for an emotional call, remembering 9/11. Thanks, Melvin. Bill is in Canada. Go ahead, Bill.
Hello, George. Happy New Year to you, my friend.
Happy New Year. Welcome. And my salute to all the good Canadians.
I'm sorry? I'm sorry.
I'm
Anyways,
sending my
I don't know
New
if
Year wishes to all the good Canadians. Go on.
Oh, cheers, George. Cheers. Appreciate it. And likewise to yourselves. I just want to touch on Benjamin Netanyahu's book from 1995 or 1996, where he, I use air quotes when I say he predicted that the Muslim world would use airplanes to crash into the World Trade Center. And unless you've actually got some input into this operation, there's no way he could have predicted that enough to write it in a book. I really, really believe Israel played a part, not
What's the name of that
because
book, Bill? I'm not a big reader of the writings of Netanyahu. I didn't know that he'd written
I'm
a
not
book
either,
in
George.
95. Can you give us the name of it?
I don't know it myself. I actually saw it in an interview with Benjamin Netanyahu where he posted about it.
Oh yeah.
And it's just so the whole project for a new American century.
Nostradamus, right enough. Yeah.
Right, they're all so connected. These people, I mean, what we're seeing in the world today is not the comings of World War III. It's the ending of World War II, because we see Russia up against the same Anglo-Saxon empire that's been attacking it for hundreds of years, right, since the times of Babylon. That it's finally so many Nazis got away from World War II in Operation Paperclip. I'm sure you're familiar with Operation Paperclip.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of World War II, we had Operation Unthinkable, where the Americans and the British turned loose from Italian prisoner of war camps. They turned 100,000 Nazis loose back into Russia, just to keep Russia fighting. And people forget that Russia lost 25 or 27 million souls battling these Nazis, and now we only have 4 votes in the UN to keep this Nazism going, and they're all the same G7 countries that are, the World Economic Forum puppets, right? And I think Israel played an integral role in 9/11 with the remote airline technology that I forget his name.
I don't.
I
mean, I've got no evidence. I've got no evidence of that, Bill, and I highly doubt it. And as for Israel being a beneficiary of the wave of radicalization that was unleashed by the Western response to 9/11, I very much doubt that as well. The truth is that extremism and fanaticism and hatred has swept the Muslim world, and swept many Muslims in the Western world in a way which is deeply inimical to the interests of harmony and the interests of intercommunal relations and the interests of Israel. Israel is not safer today as a result of 9/11. So if they had been involved in it, it was a severe miscalculation on their part. People make miscalculations, so one cannot rule this out. I myself am not convinced that the 9/11 atrocity was not carried out by the people who later claimed that they carried it out, namely elements loyal to Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda. I'm not convinced that it is not the case that that is what happened. What I am convinced of is that there's a lot of things that we still don't know, and that number of things is looming larger in my mind now that I know the sheer track record of the power in Western countries of falsification, of conspiracy, of industrialized lying. In other words, the more lies that are exposed coming from their mouths, the more one necessarily must question previous statements and narratives that they issued. I could go back a very, very long time in history to lay out the sheer scale of the lying and conspiring that the power in the Anglo-Saxon world has deployed in so many theaters. And the more I do that, the more I question 9/11, not because I don't believe that the people who seized the planes, and we know that they seized the planes, had no role in the events, but the more I wonder as to who else had a role in those events. I watched The Looming Tower on Netflix, one of the most powerful television series I've ever watched. I can't believe that these scientists were allowed to learn how to fly and to pay little attention to how to land a plane, only how to take off with one or how to take control of one. I find it impossible to believe that one arm of the United States security apparatus knew all about these Al-Qaeda elements and their relationships with the Saudi embassy, but didn't tell the other parts of the American administration. I cannot believe that. For to believe that would be to believe that America is run by children who cannot see the danger of well-known Al-Qaeda elements learning to fly in the United States of America. I can't believe that the anthrax attacks that our guest talked about earlier were not homegrown terrorist efforts. I can't believe that. I'm absolutely persuaded that the people who were sent the anthrax envelopes were sent them by people acting for the American security state themselves, because by then at least 9/11 had been seized as a casus belli for a war throughout the world, a very, very ill-conceived one, which had the opposite effect of that which it's claimed it was intended. I can't believe that an American government that murdered its own president in broad daylight was not capable of blowing up Building 7. How could I? I'm not saying they did. I don't know if they did or if they didn't. But don't ask me to imagine that it's inconceivable that they did, given that I now know the FBI and the CIA conspired together to murder Malcolm X in the Audubon Ballroom in New York. If I know that, why would I consider it inconceivable that they did 9/11, or at least played some role in it? Why would I imagine that so much of the 9/11 report has been suppressed? Why would I imagine that the petition should not even go before a grand jury to decide whether it has any merit or not? Why would I believe an American government that used 9/11 to seize unto itself plenipotentiary powers, tyrannical powers over its own people, and grant them to the security state, a security state that is now deciding whether these words ever reach you or not, at least on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other platforms on which I'm now talking to you. Given that I know all of these things, why would I clutch my pearls like a maiden ant at the very suggestion that the US government may have been involved in 9/11? I would be a fool to deny the possibility that there is more to 9/11 than we knew or even now know. And whatever else I am, ladies and gentlemen, I ain't a fool. I'll be back, God willing, on Wednesday at 9 p.m. UK time for the midweek mother of all talk shows. I hope you'll join me there, and I hope you'll spread the word about this lacunae, this oasis of free speech and free thought in the great desert that surrounds us in the mainstream media. Happy New Year.